Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jacquelline Fuller, and I lead Google.org, which is Google's philanthropy. And welcome to today's panel, where we're going to be talking to some of the folks who are doing the most innovative work around the world using technology to take on the world's biggest challenges. Let me start by giving you just a little bit of background on Google.org. So across Google, we provide about $100 million each year to nonprofits and schools and universities around the world. We also have our Googlers volunteering more than about 100,000 hours. And we give about $1 billion worth of free products to nonprofits. Two quick examples of some of the things we're working on. One that we launched here at I/O is a global effort to use technology to help people living with disabilities. So around the world, there's more than 1 billion people who are living with either a cognitive or a physical disability. And so we launched a $20 million open call. So if you have a technology, an idea for how to use technology to help people with disability, we'd love to hear from you. And out in the sandbox, we have some of our current partners who are doing things like 3D printing of prosthetics or haptic vests that can help the deaf community potentially hear through sensory input. And if you want to talk more about that, Raquel Romano is here. She's a Google SWE. She's happy to talk to you more about that. Raquel's raising her hand. Another example of an effort Google.org is involved in is we want to see more women and underrepresented minorities in computer science. So we've invested more than $50 million in partners who are helping to make that happen. And if you want to talk to us more about that, Amaju Miller is here and can talk to you. All right, so let's go to our panel now. Thanks so much for joining us here this morning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of our panelists to just briefly introduce yourself and tell us the problem that you're working on, your big idea to take that on, and how you're going to know if you're successful. And Jen, if you could start, Jen Pahlka, just giving us also a sentence or two about yourself, who you are.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jennifer Pahlka. I'm the founder and executive director of Code for America. Well, it's not that recent anymore, but I've been saying that recently I came back from a year stint in the White House, so I've had some experience in government, which was relevant to
Very relevant.
The big idea, the big problem that we're trying to solve at Code for America. The way I like to talk about it now is that if government can't do digital well, it can't govern. And we've seen some big examples of that in the past year and a half, but there are many, many more examples that you don't see, and we see them, and we'll talk about that, I think, as the panel goes on. And so our big idea to fix that is to bring practices, products, technology products, and people to the equation that have a fundamentally different approach, an iterative, data-driven, and user-centered approach to solving problems with technology. So we've been doing that for about 5 years now. And what we think is if we can continue to help government do government in the 21st century, then the world will look pretty different, because not only will we have government services that work, but I think that is how fundamentally we build trust in this major institution, that we forget how much we really, really do rely on, and we need it to work for us. So I think getting government to work is how we build that trust back.
Mm-hmm. You're setting your metrics pretty high there.
A little, yeah.
Pretty high bar. All right, Nithya.
Hi, I'm Nithya Ramanathan. I'm the co-founder and president of NexLeaf Analytics. And what we noticed early on was that there's a lack of data in the public sector.
I just want to also start by just giving them like one sentence on who you are, like what your background is, how you came to this, because I think we've got a lot of folks who are coming from different backgrounds might find that interesting.
Yeah. So I'm a technologist. So I came from academia. I was a faculty researcher in computer science. And actually, it was there that we started noticing that there was this lack of data in the public sector, plaguing problems in the public sector, particularly in global health. And so take vaccines, for example. Vaccines are a life-saving measure, especially when administered to children. And yet, too often, at an alarming rate, vaccines are deteriorating and going bad because they're kept too cold or too hot. And so for many years, many smart people at the World Health Organization, governments, ministries of health, NGOs, have been trying to address the problems in the refrigeration to keep vaccines cold, but nobody had any data. So nobody really knew what was going on, what were the problems, and what were the types of problems and solutions. And so when I left academia to help start NexLeaf Analytics, one of the problems that we took on was developing a sensor platform that could, first of all, monitor how vaccines are stored and send out text messages to nurses so that they could, even in the most remote areas in Mozambique, Kenya, in a number of countries around the world, could start taking actions to fix problems. But just as importantly, and where we really come in, is in thinking about the analytics and the data that can be then used across thousands of sites in a country to provide a government with visibility into their weakest links. And so where we come in is that we're part of a small but now growing group of technologists and computer scientists who are not just building a sensor and selling it to a country, but spending a lot of time listening to nurses, listening to governments, listening to the WHO and UNICEF to try to understand what are the actual problems that people are trying to solve, and then get the data to help answer those specific questions so that we're actually building technologies that countries are now wanting and demanding and are now using. And so what we see success looking like is now refrigerators around the world all instrumented with sensors that can actually then issue a call for help when a vaccine is about to go bad so that no child has to receive a vaccine that is spoiled or ineffective.
Great, thanks, Nithya. Robert.
Hi, I'm Robert from Charity Water, Director of Special Programs there, and my background is pretty varied. So by education, I have a degree in computer science, but then I went into management consulting, then did a whole bunch of other stuff, entrepreneurial stuff, and then I worked at the State Department in the Foreign Service as a Foreign Service specialist, working in tech R&D. Then got my MBA and was coming back to work in the Bay Area, but then got introduced to this nonprofit and got pulled over to New York and started working on this really challenging project. And the challenge was basically to combat the hurdles of keeping water points sustainable. So all across Africa and South Asia and really around the world, where access to clean water is difficult, there's these wells that are built in other forms, and they're breaking. There's millions of them broken around the world. No one really knows exactly how many of them are broken, but it's a lot. And there hasn't really been like a really good way to keep them well maintained and in working order. So we do this by doing like innovative approaches to different maintenance programs. But in order for them to make sense from a cost logistical perspective, is we had to design and develop a sensor to put in these wells. And these sensors can report back to us how much water is flowing and when it goes down and there's no flow going through. So our purpose, obviously, is to keep water flowing all the time. And, but we're hoping to do even more than that by setting a new precedence in the sector that no longer is it okay to just build a well and not like take care of it. We have to commit to giving clean water ongoing beyond that initial moment. So that's
Robert, you're really trying to establish a standard not just for clean water, but across the entire development sector.
Right, the transparency, accountability, the standards.
Yeah. And success?
Success will come when we get all the data back, and I'll go into more about like the challenges of what to do with all that data and how to utilize that and how it can continue to keep providing a lot of benefits. And this year we're putting out 4,000 to 6,000 sensors worldwide to start.
Great. Rose.
Hi everyone, my name is Rose Broom, and I'm the founder and CEO of HandUp. My background is, like so many people on this panel, very mixed, but I started in research, in behavioral research, and then I ended up working on the first Obama campaign managing data, and through that experience was really inspired by the power of technology to create social change. And so I decided to leave the research path and go into startups. So I worked for an education technology startup and then a health startup before I had an experience that led me to found HandUp. And that experience was I was walking down the street here in San Francisco, and I saw a woman sleeping on the sidewalk. It was really cold out. And I asked myself, why? Why are people still sleeping on the street at night? And I told my friend about this. My friend is an engineer, and we started brainstorming and came up with the idea, what if you could donate directly to a homeless person using technology? And we started working on that, and then we launched HandUp. So you can donate directly to specific homeless people through our website at handup.org. You know, everyone can see homelessness here on the streets, but you may not know that across the country, 3.5 million Americans experience homelessness each year, and 46 million are living below the poverty line. So, you know, through donations, but also through human connection, actually being able to send messages to people and hear back from them and hear updates of their life, we're trying to help connect the community. And success to us, you know, we're one piece of the puzzle. Poverty is obviously a gigantic problem, but success to us is making sure that everyone has a place to sleep at night, food to eat, and the opportunity to live a healthy, meaningful life.
So let's dive into one of our first topics, and that's going to be risk. So in the tech industry, we all know that taking informed risk is part of success. But as you get into different cultures, academia or the nonprofit sector or government, this whole idea, I think, is just really scary and not as common. So I just wanted to ask about both the risks that you're encountering in projects, and also a lot of you, you know, as we hear about your life plan, took a lot of personal risk in terms of making changes along your career path. So wondering, Nithya, if you want to start us off and just talk about how you've handled risk.
Yeah, so you know, personally, there was a lot of risk for me when I left academia. I was in a job in computer science and as a researcher there, and leaving to start a startup was kind of that initial risk. But I think when we first started, we needed to create a new model because we were a nonprofit technology startup. And 6 years ago when we started, not a lot of people understood even those words together. Mm-hmm. And so we really
don't.
But you know, we really had to borrow from aspects of NGOs, academia, and of course as well being a technology startup. And you know, as a lot of people in the that have seen large-scale growth in the private sector for technology know, that success comes from providing a technology that makes people's lives better, that integrates into people's lives, and that has a sustainable business model. Those are a lot of key elements. And for us, working exclusively in developing countries, that looks different. And so, for example, we have had to take donor funding to do our R&D, so that we had the time and place to first spend years listening to countries to really understand what are the challenges that are being faced in order to get vaccines to be delivered safely. So spending years listening to nurses, listening to district supervisors, listening at the national level, to WHO, to UNICEF, to all of the partners who all come together to ensure that every child on Earth gets a vaccine. And so not only did we have to really understand the problems, but then continuously iterate, of course, we all talk about that. And then one of the key elements that we had to do was go back and then actually evaluate the impact. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, for example, in randomized controlled trials, in one of the poorest health systems in the world, in Mozambique, we showed a 10x reduction in damages to vaccines. Wow. And that was critical. That's really changed the conversation.
And that's saving both lives and money.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right, and that's totally changing the conversation.
Yeah.
At all levels of the health system. And actually, you bring up a good point, because at the nurse level, they care about saving lives. Of course, everybody cares about saving lives, but at the nurse level, that really resonates with them. And then at the national level, at higher levels, they care about saving lives, but money has to be part of the equation. Right. It's how they're making decisions. And so, absolutely, I mean, these types of results
probably helps with the adoption, though, if you can say this is going to actually, these systems, these improvements could actually pay for themselves.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I mean, it's completely changed the
Tends to open a few more doors.
That's right.
Rose, how about you on the subject of risk?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, risk, anytime that you're trying to tackle a big problem out there that hasn't been solved, we don't know how to do it, you have to take risks. There is no clear path. So risk is a very important ingredient in innovation for across all different innovation sectors. Personally, a big risk for me and my co-founder was the moment where we realized our side project was getting a lot of traction. And we had nonprofits who wanted it, the homeless community was excited about it, and we were invited into an incubator. And we had this kind of moment that every innovator faces where it's like, okay, am I gonna take this leap of faith and make this my life and pour everything into this? And we decided yes, even though we didn't know, how we were gonna pay our rent here in San Francisco and how it was gonna work. But we're so glad we did. Another risk that I wanted to share with you guys along this topic of nonprofit technology organizations and how many people haven't heard of that. Well, we tried a different approach here. And so I don't know how many legal buffs there are in the room, but we actually incorporated HandUp as a new kind of legal entity called a public benefit corporation. That is a for-profit that also has a social mission embedded into the foundation of the company. And this was a risk for us because it's something new. And for us, it gave us the best of both worlds, to give us the freedom to innovate and the power to innovate with the for-profit model, but also ensuring that our values were embedded permanently into the company. But if you're doing something new, you have to take risks, and that's very important. Yeah.
Well, if there's anything that scares people more than taking risk, it's probably failure and the possibility of failure. Now, again, in the tech industry, that's something we're much more comfortable with. In fact, when I did my last review with our CFO at Google about our Google.org portfolio, his feedback to me was, because I went in saying, and we're expecting across our portfolio to have about a 10% failure rate. And he said, you need to increase that. Because if you're not failing more often, then you're not really funding innovation. And philanthropy needs to be risk capital. And we need to be we're Google, so we can take those risks, we understand that. So go ahead and fund the things that are essentially might have some more risk. But let's look at this topic of failure. And
oh, why me?
And Jen notices that I look to my friend on my left and say, is there anyone who might want to talk about the subject of failure?
Well, let's see. Maybe because I was in the White House with healthcare.gov. Maybe because we talk about the need to fail. And I think that one of the things that I firmly believe is that the comfort level with experimentation, which imply you cannot experiment and not fail. Otherwise, you didn't experiment. You just did something you knew would work. That comfort level with failure is why it's so important that people from this community, what my old boss Todd Park used to call metaphysical Silicon Valley. You may live anywhere, but you're part of a community that's comfortable with it. Must come to bring their skills and your mindset to bear on the problems that all of us are trying to solve. So government is sort of famously failure adverse, and strangely, that aversion results in, at least at the federal level, and this is just one study, they think that 94% of federal IT projects fail and it's interesting.
94?
94, and it's interesting the definition of it. So, I mean, you can say, well, so it's like never gets delivered very, very late, or significantly late, or significantly over budget. So you could say, okay, some of those are just later over budget, and lots of things are, but over budget has a different implication or a different sort of scale at the federal level than we do. So
a few more zeros.
Yeah. So healthcare.gov before October 1st, they sort of pegged at about $600 million, but it is really more than that. There was a piece of the California court system here for years that was famous for spending $2 billion to do what I think was trying to basically replicate Google Docs.
Oh.
And then was scratched. And so in the interest of reducing failures, we end up with a very, very high failure rate. And the line that explains it to me the most is what Clay Shirky said after the failure of healthcare.gov, after he and I had spent some time talking about what went wrong. And he said, the waterfall method amounts to a pledge by all parties not to learn anything while doing the work. And it's this extremely front-loaded planning process. I'm a fan of planning, but you can take it too far. We really find that what we bring is not just, to the local governments that we work with, it's not just, hey, you need to be on a different stack, hey, you need to do things in a more lightweight way, but we are going to show you that we are comfortable trying some things that don't work. So in the realm of folks who need assistance in our lives, we worked with the City and County of San Francisco a couple years ago on a problem with their food stamps. So supplemental nutrition assistant benefits, food stamps, EBT cards. You can sign up for this program, but it's very, very likely you'll get kicked right off of it. The churn in the program is very, very high because of all the very crazy administrative things that have to happen for you to stay on the program. And they wanted us to look at tech solutions for solving that problem. Really, it's a communications problem, not a tech problem. And the first kind of things that they did to solve this problem were sort of create websites and get information to people at the same time. And they tried about 4 different things that just didn't work. The good thing is, and this is critical to failure, is that they knew that they didn't work. And I think we have all experienced this culture where it's great that you haven't failed because there's no data to show whether you've failed or not. But if you have that data and you say, now I'm going to move on to the next thing, that gives you the power to iterate. You have to have something to iterate on. Over time, that team found out that they could collect text messages, collect phone numbers from the recipients, text message these folks when they were about to fall off the rolls, and then get them to call the office, which I know sounds like the least sexy tech project in the universe. But if you, it works, and if you want to get a sense of the kind of work that the fellows are doing as they're continuing to iterate on this problem now 2 and 3 years later, I guarantee you will be amazed at the kind of work that they do. The technology isn't as hard, but the work is really, really fascinating because they know every day that they're helping people go home from the grocery store with groceries and feed hungry families, and that is really, really powerful.
All right, so Robert, I know we've had many, many conversations about
Oh, failures, too many, too many. Yeah, I think, so I'll give an example of one of the failures that we went through. So, we tested in the lab, we coded it, we built the hardware. We're like, okay, this seems good, everything seems working, let's take it out into the field. We take it out to Ethiopia and install 30 or 40 or so, and none of them are communicating. Or actually, I think one of them communicated, 1 out of 30, and we're like, wait, what's going on? So we look back at our firmware, we look back at everything, and we're like, what's going on? Everything seems to be working. And we find out that it's actually a problem with the Ethiopian telecom network and how they've configured their backbone system. So then it led to, okay, these conference calls with our firmware guys in San Francisco, me in New York, Ethio Telecom, their backbone network in Italy with Italia Sparkle, and our GSM chip supplier in Hong Kong. And
those are fun to schedule.
Yeah, I think it was 3 a.m. for me. But so we're doing these calls, and it just can't get it done. So finally, it's okay. So we have the Hong Kong telecom expert fly out to Ethiopia. We had to work with the politics of the Ethiopian government because it's a state-owned enterprise, and to get him permissions to get onto their system. He gets on the system, starts reconfiguring it, gets our sensor transmitting. And then while he's there, they're like, oh, well, we also have all these other bugs. Can you fix these too? So he starts fixing those bugs, and all of a sudden, I'm getting text messages for the first time on my AT&T phone in Ethiopia. I'm like, hey. And so, but I mean, it was just, it's hard because it's you don't expect some of these problems that you have, and then some things seem out of your control, but you just kind of have to go for it. And so, that's been, communication in Ethiopia is difficult, let alone, most of Africa where we want to work in rural areas. So now we know, okay, we need to get ahead. So we've got right on Malawi, we got on Uganda, Kenya, Liberia, to make sure, because with Ethiopia, the contracts were all in place, and they actually had a whole list of roaming M2M data contracts in place, but none of them worked. For the same reasons, but we were the only ones that actually had devices out there for the first time, so no one said anything. Yeah. And so, so we got this fixed. We started moving forward. I actually just went to Ethiopia last week to put out another we have like 100 more sensors that we were configuring to test the next iteration of the firmware. So then I do that, and then it's like, again, 1 out of 30 is transmitting. So I'm like, wait, what's going on? And I talked to Ethio Telecom, find out that they just upgraded all their hardware to get ready for 4G, and then they put on the old configuration before we fixed it. So now I have to get the Hong Kong guy to fly back out there.
Call again too, yeah.
And reconfigure their system one more time. But yeah, I mean, and that's just like one example of all the many ways that the many hurdles, the unexpected hurdles. And I always tell people, like, you know, and I'm sure if there's a lot of product managers here and developers, and you know, I always say, well, you spend 10% of your time, you know, preparing for 90% of what's going to happen, likely case, and then it's like 90% of your time, you know, planning for all the 10% of things that can go wrong, right? But you have to, because you have to make this work. It has to be, you know, near perfect, especially in this kind of environment.
Well, this is offering kind of a glimpse at, you know, sometimes I get from people like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about, you know, I'd like to use my tech background to help the world, you know, do better, but I'll do that when I'm like ready for the retirement, or I'm slowing down, or I want something easier. And there's, I think sometimes this sort of subtle notion that, oh, because you're helping people or doing good, it'll, you know, not be as challenging as you know, some of the products that they're working on. So maybe if you guys are willing to share, like, what's the most challenging thing that you're coming across? Rose, do you have?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would say so many technologists want to work on very hard technical challenges. And when you think about it, the biggest problems that we face as a civilization are poverty, energy, environment, governance. And if you can apply that same mindset to solving some of the world's largest challenges, you can have a very fulfilling career. And we're just at the beginning of really seeing technology, you know, whatever phrase you like, disrupt, augment, support these industries. And the water is very warm, and you know, I encourage all of you to jump in and join us.
The water's warm, she says. All right, and Thea, do you have maybe a specific challenge you want to?
Yeah, sure. So one of the challenges that we face is being able to rapidly iterate and troubleshoot remotely. So a little bit of what Robert's talking about, but also kind of, you know, take refrigerators. I mean, these things are designed with lots of money in the R&D. They're tested in very high-tech labs. They get to remote environments, lack of power, lack of, you know, a lot of other resources, and they fail immediately. So similarly with remote sensors, there's sort of this issue of being able to test as much as we can, but then be able to remotely diagnose and troubleshoot as well. And so trying to kind of figure out that balance and that set up the environments that we're kind of still able to kind of test as much as we can rigorously in the lab, but then also be able to put in the components so that we can remotely sufficiently instrument our systems so we can remotely troubleshoot and diagnose. And then I think finally just dealing with the data. I mean, we're going to be getting data from tens of thousands of sites in the next year or so. And so just kind of thinking about not necessarily the actual volume of data, not a lot of data, especially being at Google, but just really thinking about meaningful analytics. What is really going to drive change, action in government so that ultimately we can save more vaccines, get more vaccines to kids. It's one of those ongoing interesting challenges for us.
Can I speak to the challenge thing?
Please.
You mentioned this, you know, perception that, you know, doing good sometimes is like, oh, maybe a little bit of an easier job than, say, you know, serving the millions and millions of people that would go to Google every day. Just two quick stories about that. When we did our first Code for America Fellowship back in 2011, we had people come, you know, from the tech industry, work with city governments for a year, and we hoped that afterward they would all, it's much like Teach for America does, sort of graduate into working in government technology. And we had 19 fellows that year, and at the end of the year we were going, okay, so who's going to take a job? And they pretty much all said, we're so exhausted from this.
Going back to my free lunch.
Yeah, well, the best was Scott Silverman, who had been at Apple, and he ended up, he said, I am going to go back and work at government. I just need to relax for a year at a startup. I'm going to Airbnb. It's like, this was 2011, you know. And the other story, you know, it is, I know negative cells, I think, work here, right? It is incredibly hard work.
This crowd looks to me like a negative cell crowd.
It is incredibly hard work. And the other story I would tell is, Googler Mikey Dickerson came to the White House when our
hero Mikey.
Yes, go Mikey. And was truly instrumental in saving healthcare.gov and worked, we added up his hours at one point. I think he had worked 100 days straight, 20 hours a day. So that's pretty intense. But when he was very kindly asking other Google SREs to come help spell other folks and sort of building this team that did really do this amazing work of getting the site to get through that first open enrollment period, he would tell the SREs that you will learn more in a day on healthcare.gov than you will in a year because more things go wrong. And I think that was a very effective recruiting technique.
There you go. All right, well, why don't we switch gears and talk about advice and lessons, all right? So we have a crowd of folks, a self-selected crowd here, and probably 50,000 or more on the live stream. And these are folks who are attracted to this notion of how do we use tech to take on and solve some of these big problems. So, I mean, more generally, like lessons you've learned, what do you wish you could have told yourself 5 years ago before this all started or in the early days, or advice that you might have for folks who are interested? Just
sure, I can
open it
for this. And the advice I give to people who want to become social entrepreneurs is the same as I give to any entrepreneur, is think big, but start small. Very, very small, smaller than you would even think at first. And that's one of the biggest challenges that any early stage entrepreneur will face, is keeping your scope under control and staying very focused. I was saying earlier about how many incredible opportunities there are in the social tech space. I'll add too that you don't have to leave your company to join in. Every city has Tech for Good meetups that you can join and become part of the community and contribute in small ways. And if your community doesn't have one, that's a perfect opportunity to join in and start your own and start bringing the social entrepreneurial community and the tech communities together.
Robert?
Yeah, I think, so I've feel like I've worked the broad spectrum of private, government, like nonprofit, and I've been in nonprofit for like 2 years now, and the thing that like really bothers me, it's kind of related to what we were just talking about in the challenges, that when people are like, oh, that's really good for nonprofit. I'm like, why add that disclaimer? Like, why can't it just be good? Why can't it be great? And it is this underlying thing of like, oh, there's like a lower level of effort, or the standards are lower, but actually the challenges are a lot harder. And like, I'd love to say like the reason I came to Charity Water, I mean, of course it was a part of it, but the biggest reason was because, oh, there's this altruistic like motive, like I want to help the world. Sure, like that's part of it, right? But that's not the main reason. The main reason is because I saw like how big of a challenge it was, and I love taking on challenges. Like even in my other jobs, I used to do like turnaround strategies, and I would ask them like, give me your like worst group, the one that's failing the most, and let me try to turn it around. And I just jumped doing turnarounds, and this was kind of the same thing. It's like, okay, there's this challenge that's been around for 3 decades. Let's like figure it out. And like an example is like how many people are satisfied with their cell phone battery? Of course, we're not talking about the Nexus, right? But,
no,
it's
we are
great,
not.
but
No.
the other cell phones out there. And how do you feel about after like a year or 2 years, right? And when it does drain, like every day when you charge it, you just walk a few feet and plug it into the wall, right? Well, imagine a world where you have to put out a device, and the closest electrical power source is a 2 days hike to the local market. You can't, there's no like local market where you can, even on the phones where you can replace the battery, where you can just like buy a new battery and plug it in. So we're building this sensor that has to like be out there, last for 10 years. Because if we have to go out and constantly replace batteries for the sensor, it kind of defeats the purpose of saving money by not having to go out there to check on the well. and so, when we built the sensor, it's like we had to look through, all these like batteries and figure out which one works the best in that kind of hot, humid environment. We had to figure out, we implemented some some AI techniques and learning algorithms so that the sensor can be smarter and only transmit when it needs to at the most critical moments, and otherwise just send us periodic things. So it actually learns its own behavior of the well, of what's normal, and looks at deviations. And we had to, and you know, when we look at like how to approach all these things, I'm not like talking to like, you know, people that have never done it. No, I'm talking to CTOs of the major like fitness wear, because they're thinking of like low energy harvesting. They're thinking of like, how can we optimize the power management? And when we build these products, it's not just like, sure, we start out in the garage maybe, but we're putting it through everything. We're manufacturing in China. We're putting it through UV chamber tests, heat chamber tests. We're shooting steel balls at it to measure the durability. We put it underwater. We put in humidity chambers. I mean, there's no reason why we can't build products that are just as good, if not better, than products built for the consumer market in America. And so my challenge, too, is like this attitude of even when we do get people from the private sector to help is they think it's like, oh, okay, I'll just do this like an hour before I go to sleep.
Yeah.
No, so like there's, I mean, this room is filled with some of the...
It's going to take the best of who you are, not your scraps.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, I got to the point where, you know, like, you know, we're Charity Water, we have a good brand and nonprofit, so we get offers for discounts all the time. I got to the point where I was like, I don't want your discount. Because you give me a 10% discount, and then what do I get, right? I want to pay full price. In fact, I want to pay more than full price.
Yeah.
I want to pay top market dollar because I want your best. And, you know, so when you guys get involved, you guys are like the top talent, like really take it seriously. Like it is a real challenge, and there's so many like benefits. Then there is that altruistic benefit that you're getting. And, you know, and not only that, but again, it's if you like facing challenges, which, you know.
If you like challenges, do we have challenges for you?
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
I want to jump in really quick, actually, which is just that, what if the killer apps are actually in the public sector, in these problems that we're trying to solve, and actually products were designed, rather than designing products in a first world environment and then trying to move them over, what if it turns out that actually in the developing countries, that's where the killer apps are?
Right.
And then we bring those.
Well, don't we all want this sensor that, you know, Robert's like has in a ball bearing chamber with the humidity, and, you know, if it works in Eritrea for 6 months, it's going to be great on my wrist, right? Yeah, no, that's a good point. So as we're wrapping up, any last thoughts, Nithya and Jen, about advice that you would give?
I mean, I think I would just go back to what I said. I mean, really thinking about how actually the problems that we're trying to solve in Mozambique and Kenya and Ethiopia around keeping vaccines cold, actually it turns out those problems exist here as well, but aren't necessarily maybe thought about. But as we design solutions in Mozambique, we're actually finding that partners in the US are saying, hey, wait, we want that. Actually, our vaccines are going bad here. Our fridges are failing here. And so we're working with Planned Parenthood and other partners and starting to explore how we can actually start.
Yeah, so they're saying, hey, that thing you got working in Mozambique, bring it out here. We need it in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I see that all the time.
Advice, Jen?
I would take the question as, you know, what advice if you really want to have impact? And I'm going to make a particular pitch there around impact. Think about any cause that you care about. It could be animal rights. It could be feeding the homeless. I guarantee you the government spends 100x what charitable organizations are spending. I'm not saying that they're having 100x impact. I think, you know, Rose's work, for instance, is having a huge impact with very little investment. But what if that enormous investment that's coming out of government was spent better?
Yeah.
And how could you impact that? The numbers on things, I mean, the size of the federal of government is 15 to 20% of our GDP.
Yeah.
There's more people working in government than in the entire companies of the Dow Jones combined.
Like, check the room. Raise your hand if you've ever worked for any government around the world.
Awesome.
So that was like, what, 10%, 8%?
Yeah. And I think it's a small amount, considering how big what a big portion of our economy is, and how a big portion.
Considering that what governments need most is probably the skill set that's represented in this room and on the live stream.
And I think what's changed, if some of you, you know, that was a couple of years ago for you, even 5 or 10 years ago, it used to be pretty different. I think we used to have this notion in government that digital is something you buy. And we're trying to teach government it's something you do. It's actually how we govern. And so I think that, you know, the big shift has been, and I think healthcare.gov will always mark that, I think we'll look back at it, as it's now a time when digital people have a seat at the strategic table.
Yeah.
They're able to
They're
say, no,
not
you
just
can't,
at the end.
you can't just consult me later and tell me that we bought this thing. And,
Go implement this thing when the entire strategy and blueprint is off.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
we need tech at the table.
you have to be there from the beginning, and you have to be in charge of actual, you know, there has to be digital competence within government, not just in the contracting ecosystem.
All right, so as we got to wrap, but would love for each of you, for just 20 seconds each. I think you have a lot of motivated people here who might be wondering, what's next? How can I help you in what you're doing? So 20 seconds from each of you. How can people help? What's the next step?
Okay,
I'd say, of course,
go ahead. So.
I think go to handup.org and, you know, help a homeless person in your community.
Handup.org.
And of course, we're hiring product designers, engineers, project managers, as are all these companies and all of Google.org's portfolio companies. So, you know, check it out if you're looking for your next move.
Yeah, I would say contact me as well, robert@charitywater.org, pretty simple. So, and you know, like with this project, it's not only this project that we're doing here, but I actually have been, and as I speak in other places, I've been pinged by a lot of other people that want to build tech for nonprofits and social impact, and there's a lot of different things out there, a lot of different ways to get involved. It's pretty endless, whether it's hardware, software, integration, whatever it may be. So if you're interested in getting more involved.
Brave man gave his email to 50,000 people. Nithya?
Same for us. We're always hiring, always looking for really strong technological talent. And also, I think just hoping that people who want to get involved, whether it's with NexLeaf or with others, really spending time to understand what are the problems and how do we connect technology to impact. Because ultimately, it's not actually about the technology, but how we're actually getting to that impact.
Last word, Jen.
Okay, so we want to be able to show you that you can have an impact on government. If you have an hour, you can use our Civic Tech Issue Finder and just code on something that needs coding, and that's at codeforamerica.org/helpout. If you want to come once a week, there's probably a brigade in your city if you don't live here, and that's at codeforamerica.org/brigade. So that's your citizen volunteer groups that help City Hall. If you've got a year, we're currently recruiting for our 2016 class of Code for America Fellows, the toughest job you'll ever love. You'll get addicted, I promise, and that's at /fellows. And if you're interested maybe in actually looking at a job in local, state, or federal government, codeforamerica.org/talent, let us know that. There's a bunch of really interesting open positions, particularly at the USDS and 18F, that would give you a chance to be near Mikey Dickerson, who's such a hero.
All right, everyone. Well, join me in thanking our panelists for the work that they're doing in our conversation today. Thanks, you guys. All right, thanks, everyone.